Hello and welcome to discussion today on Rajya Sabha TV. I'm Tina Jha. On the show today, we are going to talk about the economic cost of climate crisis. Top Indian companies have estimated an economic impact of about 7.14 lakh crore rupees, which is nearly 100 billion US dollars over the next 5 years from the risks posed by the climate crisis. This according to a report by CDP, an organization that works on a global disclosure system for investors, companies, cities, states and regions. Titled Building Back Greener, the report says the numbers were based on responses by 42 of 220 Indian companies that responded to investor requests and disclosed climate data. Of the 220 companies that were covered by CDP's disclosure project, 67 are large businesses and the rest are micro, small and medium enterprises. Around 88% of the 67 large companies covered by CDP reported incentivizing top management for climate-related actions, while 99% of them have board-level oversight of climate-related issues. The number of companies that identified the financial or strategic impact of climate-related risks rose from 88% in 2019 to 94% this year as compared to the previous report released last year. So on discussion today, we will analyze the key observations made in the CDP report, the climate-related risks to the Indian companies and how these can be addressed going forward. And for this, I'm joined by Director of CDP India, Mr. Damandeep Singh. And we also have with us Suruchi Bhadwal. She is Senior Fellow, Earth Science and Climate Change, the Energy and Resources Institute. Welcome to both our distinguished panelists on this edition of discussion today on Rajya Sabha TV. Mr. Singh, let me begin the program with you since it's a CDP India report. So an economic impact of nearly 100 billion US dollars over the next 5 years from the risks posed by climate crisis is of course huge. Help us and our viewers understand the risks that are being talked about and also how do companies do this risk assessment?
Thanks, Tina. Thanks for inviting CDP to speak about this important issue. So CDP is a self-reporting platform, whereas we ask companies to report what is their impact on climate change. We work in 90 different countries, and last year, nearly 10,000 companies responded to CDP. And one of the distinguishing factors of CDP is not just we ask them to enumerate what the risk is, but to put a financial and a monetary value to the risk, as also to opportunities, if I may add. And of the companies that are responding, so as I said, 67 large companies responded, 42 of them were able to ascribe a monetary value to the risk. Now, we don't tell them how to do that. They do it themselves. Like, for instance, HDFC, which has reported a risk this year of 179,000 crores, has done a scenario analysis study on floods affecting in 5 states in the country, and their business presence in this area was considered. Okay, the impact was calculated based on the value of assets and compensation to human lives, which is their employees also, in case of floods. The bank's credit exposure in agriculture and allied sectors, and potential financial impact in areas like agriculture, trade, as well as there also impacts cover on some of the sectors where they're investing in industries like cement, coal, petroleum, power sector. The largest climate impact, risk impact that has been reported comes from the State Bank of India, which is 383,500 crores, which is nearly equivalent of half the climate risk reported. So they are saying their risk basically comes from agriculture financing and agriculture businesses. So these are the largest impacts that they're reporting. There are other 2 banks that are reporting huge financial risks, like IndusInd Bank is 46,600 crores and Axis Bank 7,500 crores. Yes Bank is 2,000 crores. So these are the figures that have been reported. So of the risk that is reported, 87% is actually coming from these financial institutions.
which are the most environmentally sensitive businesses that these banks have flagged in their assessment report?
No, as I mentioned, for SBI, it's agriculture. For HDFC, the two biggest ones, again, in HDFC, it's agriculture, as well as what we call is the hard-to-abate sectors, sectors which are intensive and heavy industry, like cement, coal, power, petroleum, and power sectors.
Suruchiji, so, climate change is not just resulting in extreme weather events worldwide and also in India, of course, but also having a huge economic impact on the Indian companies. As per the CDP India report, it says 100 billion US dollars, and that, of course, is a huge figure just for the next 5 years. If we look at this report, and based on that, in the long run, do you think climate is the biggest risk to businesses?
Yeah, so the report is, right on spot in terms of highlighting the losses that are being accrued to businesses. We work on the assessment side in our organization, and all this while I've been thinking, that there are losses that are happening, and basically what is the distribution of these losses across the spectrum, starting right from the farmer to possibly the banks that Damandeep has just been talking about. So now we can see that organizations, businesses are feeling the dent of these changes that are happening and the rise in the extremes that we are experiencing, and therefore are highlighting that this would be the tune of the costs that they would have to accrue given the nature of the events that we're talking about. Ideally, if you were to look at it very broadly, each one of us, whether it's businesses or even me and you, are paying the cost of these changes in some form or the other. And while, the cost would be felt by businesses, but if you come down to individuals like me and you, the cost of food on our table would also be high. And therefore, ultimately, it at one end, it's the businesses paying for it, it's me and you paying for it, it's the farmers paying for it, or people who are dependent on climate sensitive sectors, and leading their livelihoods based on dependency on such sectors. So each one of us is going to be affected in some form or the other. And now it's very clear we are putting numbers to that and are able to see the extent of those losses.
If you could elaborate for us the kind of impact on the farm sector which is being talked about, and considering this sector is very, very important because it employs more than half of our citizens.
So there are already huge losses that are being experienced, frankly speaking. As a country, we've already experienced in the past century about 0.8 degrees centigrade rise in the average temperatures, with differentials across different parts of the country. And that definitely has had an impact on crop production in different parts of the country. So, one reason why we're very confident in terms of talking about the negative impacts, and people say, why don't you talk about the positive aspects, is because we are already growing our crops at a particular threshold level. We are in the tropical region, and our crops are already growing at a very high temperature, level. And any increase in the temperatures further to this would basically lead us to cross those thresholds and lead to the negative impacts in terms of production and productivity. So there would be fall in overall production that will be experienced until and unless corrective measures are taken. Some adjustments can be done, but the tune to which we are expecting the climate to change in the next few decades up till the 21st century, ideally, even corrective measures would fall short in terms of allowing us to adjust to those changes. So ideally, a net negative impact is most likely in this sector, and therefore losses are likely to be experienced both starting from the farm to the value chain to the businesses that are connected to it.
And what are the corrective measures that are required that you just mentioned, of which there is need at the moment?
So the government, in 2008 did come out with a National Action Plan on climate change. And one of the missions in the National Action Plan is focusing on agriculture. It's called the National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture. Now, if you look at the agenda of the National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture, it basically outlays an extensive 10-point agenda on how it wants to address it. And the first and foremost, corrective measure that we are basically planning to look at is to use biotechnology to the best of its, you know, its use to be able to help farmers with suited varieties to high temperature conditions in coastal areas, basically providing to be able to provide farmers with salinity tolerant varieties. If there's more flooding, there's more saltwater intrusion that we experience in coastal areas, then how can we basically generate varieties that are tolerant to such conditions, drought conditions, for instance, waterlogged conditions. The water keeps standing in a place for 3 days, 5 days, 10 days. Your crop doesn't basically fail, and at least you're able to draw out a certain production from that region. So there are certain measures where, of course, it has to be a mixed effort, starting from the scientists to the governments to the extension workers, reaching all the way down to the farmers, where then it gets implemented in the right manner to be able to address. So it's a whole chain of people, actors, and networks who have to come into action to be able to reduce the effect that we're talking about. And even if we lose out on any one front, we would basically fall short in terms of the implementation. So it's not an easy task that we're talking about, and it's a tall order that is being asked, but that will have to be done if we have to basically address the losses that the CDP report is talking about, and and other kinds of losses that we're expecting would basically construe.
Absolutely. So there's a collective effort that is required when it comes to effective implementation. Mr. Singh, so in that aspect, it's good that the companies are waking up to the threat of climate crisis, but are they adequately addressing climate concerns? Have they reported any improvement in recent years?
Yes, Tina, they have, and we are encouraged by that. But just to add one point to what Suruchi has also said,
sure,
that allied to agriculture and the decline in productivity and the issues related to that is also the crucial question of water. Agriculture sector uses 80% of our water use in the country. And as Niti Aayog report showed a couple of years ago, that it is going to be one of the most drastic issues affecting us going forward, possibly in the next 10 years. And that is closely allied. And how do we use our water resources? And that those water risks, the climate change and water risks are actually very closely intertwined, and they work together. Now, coming to the question on what our industry is doing anything about it. So here, what we first discussed is the climate risk from the financial sector, from what they're saying is agriculture. That is mostly, we're talking about economy-wide. Industries are working, and I have seen a constant move towards this. And we are talking to a lot of industries. And for instance, nearly 25 of them right now have an internal carbon price. They're all saying they're preparing for a carbon tax regime that is to come. The government has not imposed a carbon price, but they all know that given that the fact with climate change, we are all moving into a world where there will be a carbon constrained world, and then there will be a price on carbon. Dr. Raghuram Rajan came out with a paper just last week, and a lot of other thinkers have been talking about carbon pricing. Just yesterday, IMF and the World Bank have both spoken about how their lending going forward will be from a climate lens. We work with a lot of investors that are looking at driving now and making ESG an important criteria on whether they want to invest in a company or pull back their investments from a company. And India, with our growth plans, needs that kind of infusion of cash. So we need to be cognizant of that and moving on that. The good news is that, yes, companies are improving, are taking action. Is it enough is the real question. Yes. And what policy support can government provide in that?
So, Suruchi, when we talk about climate-focused approach in business strategy for the companies, how can the government help? What kind of action is required on part of the government?
Yeah, I think, the support from the government side, as Damandeep said, has to come in the form of policies that are promoting both low carbon development and climate resilient development. And both these aspects need to be mainstreamed into the policy and planning, structure of governments, both at the national level and at the subnational scales, so that we can see, these supporting businesses and other entities on the ground as things are being done. Because when we talk about climate change and climate resilient development that is needed in the context of these changes, it's all about development, and therefore do your development the right way so that if tomorrow things are changing in a certain direction, you're taking account of that and basically trying to address and reduce the effects of the negative effects of that. So doing development the right way. So anyways, money is going into development, but you just top it up in a way, tweak it in a way wherein you're doing development in the direction where you're able to reduce the losses and the risks and impose a lesser dent on the economy.
Yes.
So the money is all there, I would say. But if the money is utilized in the right way and maybe a little additional top up to that may help us address the challenges we are talking about.
Okay, Mr. Singh,
I think, Tina, just one
Sure,
very
go
quick
ahead.
point is that the policymakers also need to be nimble. You see, India is one of the few countries that is on track to meet the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was made in 2015, wherein the world decided that they wanted to limit the warming to 2 degrees, right? By the end of the century. But 2 years after that, the AR-15 report came out from IPCC that is actually saying that, look, you need, and it shows that actually at 1.5 degree global warming, there will be a lot more damage that was not anticipated. So we have evidence from scientists that are saying that there will be a lot more damage. We cannot wait for 2 degrees. The Paris Agreement goal, what countries have said, was going to go take the world towards 3.1 degrees. But here we have evidence now from scientists and projections that saying that there will be far greater damage. So the policymakers need to move and take action far quicker than what's required.
And is dependence on coal also posing a risk towards achieving that, Mr. Singh?
Yes, because coal is a high carbon fuel. So the point is that yes, we need to use what's available and we need to use it judiciously, but we need to find a mechanism on how do we power the economy beyond coal. So we need to have a clear pathway to do that. And in that sense, if we send a signal to the world and examine what's going on, it will be a major help. India right now remains the only major economy that does not have a net zero target. Now, we may not want to say that, look, we don't want to be part of the crowd that's doing that. But if you want to be at the table and discussing these issues globally at the G7 summit, G8 summit, at G20, we will have to think about these things, because having an aspirational goal, we find from companies, a goal at 2050, which many people and the current board directors and even us, we may not live that long to see. But to have a vision that you need to have long-term vision sends a clear signal to the investors, to the market, to the younger generation that, look, they are thinking and are investing in our future, because there are very real threats that we see in our future. I was just reading some report that says Srinagar actually had the coldest January and the warmest February. There is a snowstorm right now or happened last week in Texas. They are not built for that. The houses there are actually built for a tropical environment. But how do you deal with these issues? So these are the real threats that are facing each one of us in our lives.
Yes. Suruchiji, so real threats that worldwide every country is facing, and it's causing a lot of devastation, loss of lives as well. This is the hour when we need to act. So obviously over the past few years, we've done a lot when it comes to addressing climate issues, but it's not sufficient clearly. So what more needs to be done on part of the government, on part of individuals to address this real threat that we face?
So as you said, there are efforts that are on at every scale. If you were to see at the international level, there is a process that is in place. Whether it has worked or not is something for time to say. There is an agreement in place that countries have, which is the Paris Agreement that Damandeep was talking about. But somehow, as a scientist, I feel, the agreement also falls short of what is required to be done, because I am a hardcore scientist in the climate area. And as Damandeep was saying, the threats are real, because we do realize that the threats are real, and we are doing these assessments. We realize that, the consequences of these changes are likely to be far more greater and experienced by many. And it would be almost all the people living on planet Earth will be experiencing it in some form or the other. So ideally, we do need these measures to be taken. We need strong, stringent measures to be basically imposed, whether it's in the area of mitigation, in looking at alternatives that, Damandeep was talking about, instead of coal, fuels which have high carbon content, to renewables, but also basically exploring the renewables market and seeing the potential for it within countries. India has introduced the International Solar Alliance. It has basically formed it and has been steering it over the last few years. And that's a good example of basically setting a world example to show that we are interested in certain areas, we're interested in promoting, renewables. But ideally, I think until things go down to the implementation level and basically you see that ingrained into every aspect of development, you would still say that we are short of our goals that we would like to see in terms of implementation.
Absolutely. That's the most important part, because we have to ensure that we don't miss the goals, ambitious goals that we set for ourselves. One final remark from you, Mr. Daman Singh. You spoke about water risk earlier on. So what is the kind of proactive action that you would suggest is required to safeguard our precious water resources?
Well, water resources and all other resources. I think what we need to do is to act on what I firmly believe is our enlightened self-interest, also on climate change. There is some of the policymakers and thinkers and academics talk about co-benefits. What is it that we can do one thing that can provide us benefits in the others? We also are in a development phase where we need to bring on a lot of our population, bring them up and along the economic growth path. So we need to think and see how we can best utilize technology and work with that. We have a clear example of the telecom industry. When I was a young journalist starting out, we had to wait 8 years to book an MTNL line and get it. And there used to be a program called OYT, which in the 90s, you had to pay 20,000 rupees if you wanted to jump the queue and get your phone in 2 months. Now you can just walk into your neighborhood store and get 5 SIMs just like that. So, that is the power of technology. How do we utilize that? How do we look into the future and not say, no, we want to stick with the old path. We want to continue using fossil fuel the way the world has. The world has made mistakes. They have taken benefit from it, and now they're asking us to do this. But we need to be smart in our enlightened self-interest, use that, and move ahead so that we move up again in technology and along those lines. When we show ambition and we show a willingness to work, you will find that there is enough support that's coming.
Absolutely. No challenge is big enough that we cannot find solutions to. Thank you very much to both our panelists for joining us on the program and putting forth such valuable suggestions when it comes to addressing climate crisis issues. Pleasure having you on the program. So with that, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of Discussion Today. In case you missed the television broadcast of our program, let me remind you, you can watch it on YouTube and you can send us your feedback and suggestions as well. Thank you for your time.